This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great platform that makes crypto investing easy. You can buy, sell, trade, and earn cryptocurrencies on Uphold. They have 10 plus million users, over 200 plus cryptocurrencies, and they're available in 150 countries. I personally use this platform since 2017. They're one of my go-to exchanges. They also offer equities and precious metals that you can invest in. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Eric Chen, who's the CEO and co-founder of Injective Labs. Eric, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Eric, excited to speak with you about Injective. I'm curious about the solutions and services you all are bringing to the table. And, you've had some very big investors such as Mark Cuban, Pantera Capital, and so forth. But let's start with your background. Where are you from and where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so grew up in kind of like different places. Mainly, spent my time in Bay Area. So definitely, got really exposed to tech scene over there. Also like hop between, different regions like Hong Kong, Colorado, etc. So certainly, quite a lengthy story on like a single question.
What did you do before working at Injective?
Yeah, so basically, I was mainly working on research, specifically around some of the interesting cryptographic primitives, and also, on the side, helping out, like a fund working as a trader.
Okay, so were you trading equities and things like that, traditional financial?
It's a mix, but generally, I would say like the majority of time, definitely more crypto.
And what was your first encounter with crypto, and what was your aha moment?
I would say like there's been like multiple occurrences or run-ins with crypto before I decided to go into it full time. I think very first time it was mainly around exploring the dark web, etc. Way back in the day, and then later on, kind of running into like folks who are really excited about Ethereum and learning more about kind of like the underlying technology, etc. And also got really exposed to the scene in New York at that time with a lot of people working on different types of solutions and kind of like getting in touch like with the first set of like really crypto native people.
Let's talk about Injective. Can you tell us about Injective? Give us an overview and what makes it different from other blockchains out there.
Yeah, so Injective is kind of like a sector-specific layer one blockchain for finance. Obviously, in this case, definitely a lot more DeFi applications and a lot of kind of like financially tailored or financial focused applications as well. And it's built using the Cosmos SDK, which enables Injective to be highly interoperable through IPC, as well as a lot of the natively built bridges. It's also uniquely interoperable with Ethereum with the internal custom bridge, and interoperable with Solana, Aptos, Polygon, Avalanche, and more through a actually very recent wormhole release.
Gotcha. And is it as far as its mission and the use case, is it DeFi focused? What's the mission for Injective?
Yeah. So basically, Injective's goal is to democratize finance through decentralization, because not all of the crypto is created equally. And with the recent incidents in mind, certainly, this is like painfully clear to users. And for my kind of like first encounter with this issue, it was actually the experience when utilizing kind of like centralized exchanges in the past. And it kind of became like an ongoing topic, obviously, especially recently after everything that happened to FTX. And I think it's really about like democratizing as many aspects of finance as possible, not only within crypto, but also within the overall, traditional financial infrastructure, which is just as outdated and just as inefficient.
So Eric, there's a lot of folks who are bullish on DeFi. I am bullish on DeFi and the applications and the future of it. But there's a lot of vulnerabilities and exploits that have been happening. So tell us a bit about how is Injective, what are the security layers you have, maybe the testing to help prevent things like that from happening?
Yeah, certainly. So there's a lot of plug and play modules within Injective, and this basically ensures that Injective has kind of like out of the box a lot of these like very secure and highly optimized layers for DeFi developers to kind of utilize and tap into. So think of it like, let's say you're like a DeFi developer trying to build like a application. It'll be a WordPress solution where like you can like access to kind of like this shared common secure layer, and to overall, save a lot of development time and to enable a lot of, create like a much more superior application experience compared to like a monolithic environment. So some of those examples would be order book module, and it actually has like a kind of like an innate type of like frequent batch auction matching algorithm, which ensures that the overall process is kind of safe from any type of MEV, any type of firm running. And it ensures that your application is completely fair in terms of scaling and matching. And there's binary options, Oracle, etc., along with like a COSM WASM smart contract layer. And all of these are kind of like very much innately isolated to ensure that if there is ever like a security issue with like one application utilizing these primitives, it will not cause like a contagion or like a carryover risk to any type of other layer. So this ensures that basically when a hack would only kind of cause issues that's containerized within that application protocol itself, instead of being spilled over to like the overall ecosystem, like a lot of the previous hack that's done before. And most of the security issues, especially recently, especially those that are highly profitable for like hackers, it has been like bridge. And this is also why for Injective's case, there's not really like a canonical bridge for accessing into the ecosystem, but rather it's ensure support to as many bridges as possible, so the users have the optionality, and being able to kind of select various solutions and really diversify the economic risk from these type of security exploits. So I think it's more about moving ahead to the issue, because you can't prevent hundreds of thousands of developers from making mistakes, but what you can do is to ensure that their mistakes are not costly.
Right. Can you tell us a bit about the blockchain protocol? Is it proof of stake and also some of the tokenomics of the INJ?
Yeah, so it's built using the Cosmos SDK. So basically, it utilizes a proof of stake mechanism, and it kind of shares the same like common staking property as most of the Cosmos-based chains. So this means that the native token is utilized for securing a network, for delegating validators, and to ensure the network over time is as secure as possible and as decentralized as possible.
And what is the tokenomics of the INJ token? Is supply? Is there any burning? Anything like that?
Yeah. So basically, for the native token, it has an inflationary aspect through the proof of stake, but more importantly, it also has a deflationary aspect from the overall matching or the exchange module. And this basically ensures that every single week it undergoes a buyback and burn process, where to be more accurate, auction and burn process, where a lot of the fees collected through various applications and different types of like components are aggregated into this pool, and anyone can bid for the value of that pool, with a slight arbitrage gap, and to be able to burn the proceed of the top bidder. So this basically ensures that maybe a market maker or maybe like any type of ecosystem participant can bid using INJ, and the top bidder will essentially get all the content or all the assets within that auction pool, and in return, the INJ that was being for the top bidder will be burnt. So overall, this is a deflationary economic as the ecosystem grows, and I think to date it has burned more than 600,000 INJ. And funny enough, I think the most recent one, which was used to kind of burn like the Genesis generation, so that one was actually like a 5 million INJ kind of burn. And that was basically like a very, very creative way to utilize, like this burn mechanism without having to kind of like add like a implementation of like a burn coin module, burn coin feature.
Got it. Could you highlight some maybe decentralized apps or partners who are adopting Injective and building on it?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot. I think just to be fair for everyone, we'll just go by like chronological order in terms of like those that are like deployed most recently and stuff like that. So I mean, Cato's a really huge ecosystem participant. They recently enabled fiat on-ramps for any type of Injective applications. And then Binance Custody also, supported a staking feature. Also like Coin98 also has a very native integration with Injective. And in terms of like Injective native projects like IJ Dojo, Frontrunner, Helix, etc. Those are all like projects are completely native to Injective ecosystem. And I think Frontrunner is doing a great time right now because of the World Cup and getting a lot of user onboarding through like their betting application.
Can you tell us about the latest funding round? I believe it was $40 million, included Jump Crypto and BH Digital. And then before that, I also had noticed that you guys were part of a funding round with Mark Cuban, Pantera Capital, Binance, and so forth. Can you tell us about those funding rounds and how you're deploying the capital?
Yeah, I would say like quite simply, it's all meant for like ecosystem growth. So overall, developing core components, and more importantly, to be able to fund different types of projects, different types of efforts, and be able to support the ecosystem in like various ways. So I think recently, like Jump and Brevenhauer participated in the latest funding round, and the reason why the ecosystem partnered with them is because Jump is one of the biggest trader in traditional markets and also in the crypto market, and their experience and their level of support extends far beyond just the kind of capital contribution. And then obviously for Brevenhauer, they're one of the largest kind of like traditional like macro fund or like just in general hedge funds out there. So it provides a lot more like traditional and institutional kind of like insights and also resources for the ecosystem to move forward for the next 5 to 10 years, and to kind of put the Injective in the best position to kind of bring on board the eventual like traditional institution users down the road.
For sure.
And
sorry.
Yeah, and I think previously it's a lot of supporters for like various stages of the chain, of the network, of the ecosystem. And I think before it was definitely just working with a lot of different types of like investors and backers to kind of collaborate on how to bring on as many users, bring on as many developers, etc.
Can you tell us what's on the roadmap for 2023? And I know sometimes there's things on the wrap, but any major updates that you guys plan to release in 2023?
Project X, that's like kind of this kind of protocol or like a primitive that we've been working on for a very, very long time. And it's very, very exciting for us because I think in 2023, it's going to finally going to kind of like come onto the ecosystem in full force. And basically the protocol will have two main components. One is kind of like a automated vault trading strategies for kind of like a passive a return generation, and also like a one-click launchpad. So it enables market making to be done on top of a central limit order book in the most gas efficient way. And that's obviously not possible before. And on top of that, by utilizing this type of like market making model, it also enables kind of like this direct listing process, which was also not possible before. So overall, like it can be this single innovation within kind of like a efficient modeling for any type of generalized on-chain generalized environment with on-chain constraints can be applied not only to kind of like the most naive use case, which is hey, let's say LP and provide liquidity, but also, to being able to, for projects to launch like a direct listing process for more, market efficient pricing, et cetera.
Are there plans, and I apologize if I missed it when you said it, are there plans to add more interoperability with other blockchains, outside the ones you mentioned, Ethereum and Solana and so forth? Do you plan to add more to the list?
Yeah, that's always an ongoing effort. And, I think that's a little bit under wrap right now, but we do have a plan for kind of bringing on like various developers from different ecosystems and kind of maximizing composability and ensuring that different ecosystems can work very, very seamlessly together. So that's under wraps right now.
Sure. Yeah.
But in terms of like ongoing consistent efforts, certainly, connect to as many ecosystems as possible through, bridge solutions, through expansion of, bridge deployment, bridge connection, et cetera. I think that's always the first step. And, the second step is expanding the composability across those applications to ensure that the users from different ecosystems or to developers from different ecosystems can use, Injective, as a chain without having to make it painfully obvious to the user that they're hopping between blockchains. And I think that is the goal. I would say, like for Injective's case, it's really about maximizing the empowerment of developers or applications than trying to create this closed ecosystem.
Question for you: is your solutions both for retail and institutional, and how can institutions use the platform as well?
Yeah, so for institutions' case, it's like very, very interesting because for developers, whenever you're building something that's like protocol, DeFi protocol, or a certain more like UI UX level innovation, et cetera, you're really thinking about the general like average day user or general public. But for the institution's case, it's really about finding like a platform and kind of like digging down to the core primitives and the core offering, and maybe interfacing with various protocol level tools as well and primitives. But it's about really having that like access and seeing the advantage and seeing the value prop of the chain, of the ecosystem. And just to list some examples, I think one of the most interesting part is that a lot of institutions are looking for ways to have kind of like fungibility and also settlement for like derivative instruments and also like financial instruments in general. And most of the time, it's very, very difficult, especially within crypto, to have that fungibility. And a lot of institutions saw value in kind of having this platform that's not just fast but also scalable and high throughput and DeFi focused or finance focused, to have it as like a place to be able to settle and either trade or settle different types of derivative positions, different types of instruments, et cetera. And so obviously, there's not going to be a UI for it per se. There's not going to be, like a kind of like a user and very, very fancy interface. But I think digging down to the core, like institutions are like very uniquely excited about like things that end user won't necessarily see. And but institutional adoption thereby brings a lot more usability, liquidity, and adoption for the end user.
It recently JP Morgan, it was reported they were conducting some DeFi testing and so forth. We're still very early. I personally been saying we're maybe in DeFi 1.0, and there's going to be 2.0 and 3.0, and things, there's going to be multiple iterations. What do you think might be the catalyst where more of these traditional financial players like banks and so forth start to really dabble in DeFi? I think once again, some of them are piloting and testing. What do you think might be the catalyst? Is it just time, that they'll test and then figure it out and then adopt it?
Yeah, I certainly think it's all about time, because the irony here is that like often people kind of view like a certain thing as like a catalyst, and that triggered like a whole movement. But in reality, the real catalyst for that initial catalyst to happen probably happened like a year or two ago, and people are just not immediately privy, or like it's not immediately obvious to people that this is like something that's like years in the making. The thesis was built like years ago. And I think right now, like all these like pilot programs and all these initial adoptions and a lot of these testings, we've certainly seen a lot of the institutional movements and kind of interests for the past year. But I think like to the public, it definitely feels like basically kind of like the issue around FTX, et cetera, trigger like a huge rush of adoption or interest towards DeFi, which is not necessarily the case. It's certainly accelerated and shifted priorities for various traditional institutions. But the effort has been started, a year or two ago at the minimum.
Yeah, and to your point, this FTX situation, I think there's a lot of takeaways from it. Obviously, regulations, but the move to DeFi as well, away from CeFi. And do you think this FTX situation, since we're talking about that, sets the industry back, maybe a couple of years or so?
I think it's short-term pain for long-term longevity and health. Certainly, it never feels good, and the industry will definitely, in terms of like adoption, interest, or general, market capitalization. Or valuation, it would definitely be set back by a certain number of years. But I think by slashing the Kraken's head, like early on, before it becomes like a too big to fail situation, I think this is very, very important for the overall kind of direction of where the space is going. And this, but by having this sort of collapse, by having mistrust of centralized actor and understanding, unfortunately in a very, very somber way, will ensure that the space has a value prop and also has kind of like the self-regulated direction for it to be truly like 1,000 or 10,000 times bigger, because otherwise we would be stuck in kind of like this this spot where innovation is not rewarded, but rather spotlight or different types of I would say like flamboyant-ish events has a lot more media value. And I think now it's like really like nudging the space towards the correct direction.
There are obviously like a lot of centralized exchanges, custodians, and so forth. And this is a hard question. Will they be kind of forced to use more DeFi solutions, or maybe it's a mix, right? Maybe like an example, Binance will have a centralized aspect to their business, but also have a decentralized aspect to their business, and maybe users, as they become more educated about these tools and technologies, will go more the decentralized route. And then eventually evolve where it's no longer a centralized finance. And I know that was a long-winded question there. If I explained that right.
Yeah, I think it's going to be like a balance. Obviously, like centralized players can't just flip the switch the next day. And, the immediate move towards having proof of reserve is probably like a more surface level, like addressment of these issues. And over time, they're going to have to prove to the users that they're trustworthy, that everything is transparent, that the users have sovereignty or ability for controlling over controlling their own asset or controlling their own position. And I think this is probably going to manifest in some form of a hybrid utilization of DeFi primitives. That being said, I think at the end of the day, like centralized players, they're acting in the interest of their own kind of like shareholders. They're at the end of the day, like to themselves, and the custodial nature of things is kind of like tied hand in hand with centralized platforms. And I think over time, like it's never going to be like a hybrid that that will ultimately be indefensible to the user that they are indeed trustworthy. But I do see that there's going to be improvements on, just in general, like transparency and oversight into kind of like the practices of centralized players.
Now, I think a lot of people started moving their crypto off exchanges once this FTX situation happened, despite, the audits you mentioned, the transparency, proof of reserves. And I'm a big believer in self-custody. I have hardware wallets. That's where I keep the majority of my crypto. But for those who are participating in like DeFi, borrowing, lending, yield, and so forth, any tips that you have on how they can safely do those things and maybe what to watch out for and things like that? And I know that could be a long list, but maybe the top 5.
Yeah, it's a long list. For starters, use a hardware wallet above all else, because hardware wallet is actually designed very, very well to ensure that you, would never expose your private keys in the most naive way. And on top of that, always pay attention to what you sign and what you're giving away. And oftentimes, different types of phishing attacks, etc., are triggered this way. I would say another very interesting aspect is that understand kind of like what power are you giving to the smart contract or like the DeFi application, etc. And Injective is actually designed in a very interesting way where generally it's actually like highly self-contained in terms of like risk and what users are kind of putting their asset, like the amount of risk that the users are putting or taking on, and like for them to have sovereignty and optionality over deciding like how much risk they're willing to kind of like take on or like what type of activity they want to do. And this is like manifested in a few ways. Number one is like so for like ERC20, there's like a approval message on Ethereum, where generally people just approve like their entire balance. Whereas on top of Injective, there's this auth primitive, which allows you to kind of give away permissions only for a certain, only for a selected few like type of like interactions or type of activities. So putting it concretely is that one of the interesting, one of recent, really, really interesting use cases that people came up with is there's a sub-account concept on top of Injective for every single address. And this allows you to isolate risk for like different types of portfolio, for different types of activity. So if you put everything into one sub-account, this means that, all of your risk is contained within that. But if you spread out different strategies across different sub-accounts, it will not kind of like spill over or cause contagion issues if one sub-account goes down.
Sure.
And essentially, there was a very, very creative utilization of this where users can delegate permission, any type of trading related transactions, post limit order, cancel limit order, etc. And then the most interesting part is that they do not give permissions like deposit, withdraw between sub-accounts, or sending tokens, etc. And this essentially allows for another address or another smart contract to be able to control and to participate in activity without kind of losing that aspect of custody. And this means that smart contracts cannot possibly take away your funds or take away move things on and off sub-accounts. So this is one of those like really interesting use cases that initially was done for like security reasons, and then like the community figured out like very, very creative utilizations for
it. Very interesting. What are your thoughts on U.S. crypto regulations and how things are progressing? A lot of folks are anxiously awaiting clarity. We don't want heavy-handed regulations. It has to be balanced, right? Foster innovation. Weed out the scammers, of course. but allow the folks to continue to build and for this industry to grow. There's a lot of bills in Congress right now. A lot of people are not happy with the SEC. What are your thoughts on how things have been progressing?
Yeah, certainly. I think like clarity above all else. Good regulation, bad regulation are both way better than unclear regulation. I think this is the most important part. It's very difficult for me to predict or comment on future regulations over industry. And obviously, the recent events did not make this industry look pretty in terms of what regulation may come.
Yep.
But that being said, the attention that brought on kind of urges the U.S. government or any type of international governments to have, for first time ever, most likely, clarity on exactly what to do with this industry and to truly recognize the sector as something that's unique. That's not something that's going to fit into kind of like their traditional model. Because technically speaking, FTX is a perfectly legal operation to the U.S. government. That is the irony, because FTX Bahamas has nothing to do with U.S. persons, and unless there are more fraud happening on the FTX U.S. level, then like FTX collapse are technically following every single rule outlined by the U.S. government, and the only solution to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again from a regulatory perspective is to truly bring on the platforms, bring these like kind of players onshore rather than pushing them offshore. Because once it's offshore, like there are effectively no regulation or any type of jurisdictional issues for these platforms to adhere to. And I hope that like the overall the government recognizes that, and most of the regulators recognizes that, because that will certainly kind of in like a strange way force them to kind of create better and more friendlier regulation or bills, so that in the long run it will be net beneficial to the space.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on NFTs and the metaverse, and as well as DeFi being applied within those respective aspects?
I think like it's overall DeFi is like it can be as generic as possible, or like it can be involved in as many things as possible, and certainly like NFT perspective, like there has been a lot of activities and a lot of projects building on things related to NFT within the Injective ecosystem. And obviously, anything that involves trading, anything that involves value to it, certainly has a hint of DeFi to it. So I think overall, like NFT or kind of like this financialization of digital goods, etc., is very, very interesting. And they basically kind of removes a lot of barrier and kind of creates like a greater democratization, so that traders, so that artists, etc., just have like a greater empowerment through their own work, rather than having to go through like different gatekeeping entities and different processes that are definitely meant to like protect incumbent artists, etc. Right? And I think certainly it's going to be more and more fun when the floodgates open and the world gets more and more permissionless. And I would say generally it's going to be a very, very interesting world in 10 to 20 years.
For sure. So on that note, and this is a hard question, what do you see the market in 5 years? After all this FTX nonsense is in the background, and we're past the next Bitcoin halving, maybe the next bull market. I'm not talking about price predictions, but do you see more growth, more people coming in the industry, more institutional adoption, things like that?
Yeah, I would say the market will certainly be bigger in the next 5 years. That's without a question. But in terms of like bigger in what way, how much bigger, that is going to be way too difficult for me to answer.
For sure, for sure. All right, I got some wrap up questions here for you. First, some rapid fire. Favorite food?
Ripple,
Favorite musician or band?
Joji,
Favorite movie?
the Exterminating Angel.
Favorite book?
I would say it's like the one I'm reading right now, which is like the Habsburgs to rule the world, which is basically this like historical account of like kind of like the Habsburg Empire.
Hmm. And what do you do for a hobby when you're not working at Injective?
I don't think anyone in DeFi has time for this.
If you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
I was thinking it's going to be very, very similar to Ready Player One, which is like, it's a Wild West, any style. Like you might be hopping between like completely different themes, different worlds. Everyone gets to express themselves. I would say that's like most likely the case for me.
Cool. All right. Great chatting with you. Looking forward to the new updates around Injective. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.